Our Father in heaven, we're grateful to be here this evening. We're grateful for the opportunity we have to have a planning commission meeting. We pray for thy guidance and that we may be able to make the best decisions possible for North Ogden City. And we say this thing in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Please rise and repeat the Pledge of Allegiance with me. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'll make note that Commissioners Bailey and Johnson are excused tonight.
Commissioner Webb. You call him Commissioner Johnson.
Oh, it's because I'm looking at
His first name.
his paper here is Johnson. Sorry, Commissioner Webb, thank you. Consideration and action to approve our August 21st, 2024 Planning Commission meeting minutes. Any questions or corrections?
Having reviewed those minutes, I move we approve them.
Motion is second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Do we have any ex parte communications or conflicts of interest with the agenda tonight with any commissioners? All right, well, let's begin. We only have one item tonight, so which is legislative, so we have no administrative.
Point of order. Do we have anybody online?
Just Councilman Pulver.
Great, thanks.
So we'll begin with public comments. If the public would like to address us for anything that is not on the agenda tonight, please feel free to do so at this time. Step up to the mic or raise your hand online. All right, being there's no public comments, we'll move into our item for tonight, which is legislative item of the annexation 2024-01. Consideration and action on a legislative application to annex property at approximately 1661 North Washington Boulevard and zone the property multifamily residential. Did you find out the name? I was thinking the name is just R4 residential.
Yep, multifamily R4 residential.
It is multifamily in the zone name?
Yeah.
Okay. Our presenter is Scott Hess, our Community and Economic Development Director. Scott?
Thank you, Chairman Thomas. Just wanted to briefly give you an overview of the annexation process generally and why it's a little bit different than a normal rezone or other legislative items. Annexation is guided by a specific section of state code, and all of the public noticing and the hearings are led by our city recorder's office. So the annexation petition is certified by the county. It's applied for at the city through the recorder's office. All of the public notice postings go through there, and we are one step in a multi-step process of making recommendations both from staff, service providers. That includes culinary water, secondary water, gas, power, and storm sewer, and then planning commission on a recommendation level. And then it all gets packaged up, and the formal public hearing with the public that's noticed and mailings go out happens at that city council legislative item. So it's a little bit different track than our normal rezone applications that once they're in the city. And that's just a clarification on the way Utah State Code handles annexation specifically. So while this is a public meeting, and we can collect public hearing items on it if there's any members of the public, that's why it's different. And so we would expect members of the public to have been mailed and notified at the time of that city council meeting. Question?
You kind of clarified it. So
Okay.
there was no notice prior to this meeting.
No,
Okay.
the only notice on this one would be that the meeting went out on the Utah Public Meeting Notice website as required the week prior, and at least 24 hours on the city website. So the agenda being posted last week when it was sent to you is the notice that was essentially given for Planning Commission's action tonight, which your specific action tonight is to review and think about the general plan and how it relates to the request of the applicant, and then make a recommendation to city council on a land use on two things. One, should the city bring this land into the city? It is in our annexation declaration. And then two, what the appropriate land use designation for it should be when making that designation. So this is just over 20 acres, 20.5 acres. It's multiple parcels, 4 individual parcels. The council has weighed in and decided not to reach out and grab the additional parcels that are left over on Washington Boulevard. This kind of, I would say, like abandons or leaves 3 parcels of frontage out on Washington Boulevard that through an agreement that we have with Weber County could have been reached out and grabbed in this process, and we could have forced the hand and done that annexation. But city's policy to date has been that we'll just let people come in and make those requests when they want to. So those will be annexed at the time that they're ready to be annexed.
Isn't the one parcel, you mentioned those 3 parcels, but isn't that one to the north actually already in that approved project with Severing?
There is, but there's 3. I mean, I don't know if John has the county GIS map. We could pull up the county GIS map and show you the parcels that are remaining. There was a discussion on what to do with them essentially, but there's three different residential properties between Harry Severing's parcel on the corner of 1700 and Washington, and where there's a little like flagpole on the property 1595 North Washington Boulevard that touches. So the pieces that are left out are 1625, 1647, and 1661.
Oh, that.
So
little
those
tiny
central
tree.
pieces,
Okay.
and then on the south, it's 1597 and 1583. Well, everything essentially south of the 1595 parcel, all of that. So there's another approximately 18 acres to come into the city that are still in the city's annexation declaration. None of it is contested between Harrisville and North Ogden City, and the certifications have been made by our internal culinary water that we can provide culinary water to this area. The new water tank up on 2100 North has taken care of the water storage issues for our southwest quadrant of the city. So we now are ready to develop. We don't have any issues as far as numbers of doors that we can serve and what we have as far as culinary water and storage goes. So for the background, staff looked at this. The area is in the general plan shown as multifamily, and it could be mixed use. I think the mixed use with the commercial component is really focused out on Washington Boulevard with those pieces that are left over. The kind of flagpole piece that touches Washington Boulevard is not really wide enough to be a viable commercial property on its own. We'd probably in the legislative process recommend that in the future, there may be some sort of cross-access agreements. And also UDOT has been interested and weighed in on where a future permanent east-west road goes. So the flagpole parcel on the south doesn't line up exactly with the roadway that is coming out near Walker Cinema. So I think there's some questions to be had in the future about what the secondary access looks like. But this property would have 150 east access as well as another access off of 1700 north. So you have looped dual accesses. And so I don't think we're going to run into an issue with Ryan Barker, the fire marshal, on the total number of doors being able to be serviced off of that one roadway. It's not a dead end T or a dead end intersection. We have a concept plan. This process doesn't bind the applicant to that concept plan, but it gives you an idea that what they're trying to do is develop a project that would meet the R4 requirements without going into a number of development agreement items or property exchange or zoning exchanges with the city. The one question they have is that their 3-story flat stacked building types do exceed the 35-foot height maximum at about 42 feet tall, but we have a PUD ordinance section that addresses that. So we can do an averaging between the 2-story and the 3-story buildings that as long as the project on the whole doesn't exceed 35 feet, some individual buildings can. And then there's also opportunity for a parapet to hide any mechanical equipment on the roof. So that 42 might be to the peak of the roof, and then you may end up with some parapet or hiding equipment hiding stuff on that roof, depending on the way the architecture is designed. In staff's opinion, this conforms to the general plan. One item that I want to note that isn't addressed specifically in the staff report is, and John, if you can pull up the general plan, this area has been slated in the general plan park section as well as in the future land use map to have some sort of public open space. So we're within half a mile or less of Harrisville's fairly large, like regional park that's down there. You can directly access it through the Spring Meadows subdivision via a trail easement that we required them to connect through the open space and wetlands. So when the townhome project that's south and west of this develops, you'll have 150 east to 1500 north. You'll have a direct connection to an open space, but it's in another city. So we can't, we look at these things kind of from our own boundaries. On the map there that's shown, that number 5 is the combination of a Weber School District owned parcel and Mud Creek Detention Basin. I think that the end result or the idea is that Mud Creek Detention becomes the ball field or play field for the elementary school that's slated down there. We don't have timeframes on that, but that would be coming, especially with all these new rooftops that are coming in. So staff was of the opinion that number 5 and the open space may have been 1-to-1, or depending on how the requests come in through these legislative processes, maybe there's an exchange of zoning density for some open space collection. That's typically how it works. So if an applicant comes in and requests just a base zone that meets the general plan and you don't have any development agreement items, it's that legislative process at the council level that can dictate what they do. They're not under any obligation to accept this annexation or to give R4. But can certainly look at some exchanges or some property if they're looking for collecting public open space, because the concept plan as shown doesn't have any public open space. It doesn't dedicate a park or do anything like that down there off of 150. So this came up in the discussion last night at the city council work session, and I wanted to just make note of that in case the planning commission had any strong feelings or wanted to build that into their recommendation to consider maybe any amount of public open space park creation. And from staff's perspective, that would probably come with some form of a negotiation in either, exchange of dwelling units for that open space or some sort of betterments, improvements, maybe regional detention basins. I mean, there's a number of things that could happen, but we just wanted to bring that up and make sure that you're aware of that as something that's on the discussion side of things happening at the city council level. So for our recommendation, staff recommends that the planning commission recommend to city council for annexation of this property and apply the multifamily R4 zone. The following conditions are just following our process. The property will still need to be subdivided, improved, escrowed for improvements prior to the issuing of any building permits. So this doesn't entitle the land outside of anything. This process won't entitle the land outside of anything other than giving a zoning designation and determination. But the time for things like collecting public open space or exchanging density for open space happens at that legislative process when the zone is applied. If the council doesn't do that now and it gets zoned R4, then they just have that as their base zoning and the sandbox that they can build their project around. No other major recommendations on this one. We've worked with surrounding property owners, Terry Severing and Wall Companies, which is on the north and the south, regarding 150 East. They've worked with those parties to make sure that road alignments are going to work and overall concepts are going to work, which is something that's critical as there's 3 different developing agents kind of happening or projects happening. But so far working with the group, it's been a great process and really collaborative, and we'd recommend approval and move them forward and get a project going. And with that, I'll take any questions. And we do have the applicant representatives here with West States Companies.
I do have a question. On that general plan future land use map that you had up where it had the 5 and the 6, in that 6 box where it's green
Yeah.
on that plan, is that where,
Yeah,
what is that representing conceptually?
It's just representing conceptually. We need some open space in this area conceptually. And it's sort of
There or somewhere?
there or somewhere. Yeah. If you
Yeah.
go to the parks map, if John clicks on the parks map, there's an asterisk and then there's that darker green circle. And it says that somewhere within a half-mile radius of approximately 1700 north, we need some public open space. And the public open spaces in that area are, we have a detention basin with Roylands Farms. We have Coldwater Creek Trail, the trails at the lodge, but they're more like linear park spaces than actual proper park space. And then just outside of the, right on the corner of the city boundary to the southwest corner is where Harrisville's regional park is at. So you're just right outside of that. That's probably where most of the residents in that neighborhood are recreating right now, really kind of as a shared resource. But again, we pretend it doesn't exist there when we're looking at our own city boundaries and park space per population and all of that.
And where the blue 5 is, that's the projected
That's the
elementary school.
Yeah, that the blue squares on the future land use map are civic spaces. So that's the current detention basin and then the property owned by Weaver Basin.
Any other questions for Scott?
I guess, Scott, I'm just wondering, is there a reason this particular parcel of land may be more like advantageous for that green space than others? Because correct, there are other spaces to the north and south that are in that general vicinity. I don't know if you can speak to that more.
So Terry Severing's project was kind of skinny and long and it's already been entitled. So there's
Okay.
nothing that's going to happen on the Severing piece. And then similarly on the, I'm going to call it the Wall Company's property, but it's right at the end of 1500 North, at the end of Spring Meadows, single family subdivision. There's an 11-acre rectangle of property that was annexed into the city 2 years ago. And that one was annexed straight at R4. So we're kind of like we've annexed and applied land use designation. So at this point, it's either this collective annexation with West States or the remaining hill property. There's about that like 18 acres that's remaining that is north of the townhomes on 1500 North Third in Harrisville that could also be considered or collected for a park. And cities collect open space in a number of ways. Sometimes it's through park impact fees. Sometimes it's through just general fund and capital facilities dollars where we might go out and buy pieces of property as they're made available. The most common way that I've seen in the last 15 years is exchanging density for open space. So you get the same number of doors on any given piece of property, but you cluster them down or increase the density, and then you collect that property through land dedication.
But to answer the question, why it's there, I can take a stab at that, I think, maybe. When the general plan was adopted and I was kind of a outsider to this, I mean, the planning commission was involved, but there was a number of interested parties, including citizens and a general plan committee, some of whom are in the room today, and they basically were playing Farmville on a piece of paper, right? Like, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys, but what should go, where should businesses be and where should houses be and where do we need a park? And this is the general plan is the latest stab of that combined effort, right? So I'm of the opinion that we do need park/open space in there to be adherent to the general plan. And I'm also of the opinion, since we're in discussion now, that we shouldn't rely too heavily on externalities for that purpose, right? Like I understand that it's within walking distance of the Harrisville Park, but where North Ogden City doesn't control the ultimate destiny of Harrisville Park, I'm of the opinion that Harrisville could swoop in and change that into a Walmart. I don't see that happening, but it's technically possible outside of the control of North Ogden, and our residents would be stuck without what they've deemed they want in the general plan there. So,
The other thing that's a little concerning is because of not just this particular parcels that we're looking at tonight, but directly north, there's the whole, townhouse apartment
Village of Prominence Point.
complex, and then directly across the street, I guess that apartment building's still on by the movie theater, right? That's on the
Yep,
city
Cooperstown.
line,
Right.
which is also multifamily
Mhm.
apartments, I believe. So
Yeah.
it's a lot of people, probably a lot of kids and everything else without.
The one
breaking
thing
it
is
up
that
somehow,
I'm sorry, yep, I
No, go
agree.
ahead on that.
Our R4 ordinance requires 50% open space, and that's the way we're looking at it is like a floor area ratio essentially. So for all your floor area ratio of building that's sitting on the ground, you have to have that much open space. So the property would provide for its own residential, residents, open space and some of that reprieve. It's just not public. And that's the same at Village at Prominence Point has significant amenities and open space kind of for those 600 doors and dwelling units there. But again, it's not public open space. So there's a bit of a trade-off there, and maybe it can be Dual use, Century Farms was a bit of a dual use. There was some property dedication and then some money to improve a park on city-owned property next to it. So there's a number of ways you can do this. I think it's good to be sensitive to it. It's just that we don't have a crystal ball on when these things are going to come in. And as of right now, we've sort of accepted the annexations at just the base zoning and then let those projects stand on their own open space requirements that they'll have to provide.
So to clarify, just for the commission, we could put something in here to require a public open space, but there's already going to be a requirement for private open space.
Correct. Yeah. And you could make it as a recommendation.
Recommendations.
So
Yeah,
it
we
could
can't put
be,
anything in there.
the planning commission could recommend approval and acceptance of the annexation at a certain zoning density with the addition of, requirement to dedicate some public open space. And maybe that's to be determined unless you
And
have
a
an
project usually like this, the open space can overlap or play dual source for their 50% requirement.
It
If
would.
they're the ones
Yeah.
contributing it. So it's not that we're double dinging them either.
Correct.
Sure. Yeah, I'm just saying, based on a recommendation, no, we don't really control where it goes from here, right? But we can all be rest assured that there will be open space. We can just recommend it be maybe public or different or
Yeah.
accessible to more than just the residents.
Do we need to be specific about it or?
You could be, and again, just take it with the grain of salt that legislative actions have broad latitude at the legislative level, right? So you could recommend anything down to very specifics or something broad, and the council can kind of do with it what they want. And I think that the Century Farms that I brought up earlier is a good example of that Planning Commission recommended townhomes, and then it spent months at the council level and turned into small lot, single family was the first iteration of that project, right? And that was through the rezoning process that just sort of ended up in the
Or a
council.
car wash.
Yeah, no car
I'm not
washes.
bitter.
No car washes. So, but you can, it's something to discuss, and then also the applicant, and we can look at the concept plan. And if you have any questions on that, they've got like a landscape architecture concept plan in there, as well as the one that breaks down some of their open space and individual elements, if you want to look at that. But I think it's worth noting, and especially since it was just, brought up as recently as yesterday with the council, I know it's going to be on the radar of the council.
But yeah, I think we need to figure some way out to hopefully that the council will address. What tends to happen, as you can see, is, hey, we want some public open space, and we're annexing and developing this area that we want in little pieces that then each one individually, then all of a sudden it's like, well, wait,
Yeah.
this is all developed or planned out, and where did it go?
Right.
There needs to be a collaborative effort because nothing's been built there yet. So there's the opportunity to be a collaborative effort with the neighboring developers, the Walls, the Severings, or whoever buys Severings or whatever they're doing there, to maybe put something together. Would be a recommendation to the council that they would look at that. I don't want to put the burden all on one developer coming in, hey, this is the third one in the area.
Yeah.
There's most likely going to be one more, and then that's probably it.
Yeah.
But something needs to be addressed where there is that thought and foresight put into that, hey, and something can be hopefully worked out at some stage that can be done. So.
And just from a practical standpoint, this area with Mud Creek going through it, Spring Meadows has Army Corps of Engineer dedicated wetlands in it. And I think that's not unique just to that parcel, to that southwest area. So this area is, high water table is it's an understatement. There's some really soggy pieces of ground here. So the open space too that might be collected, you might think of more as like natural open space than playing fields and ball fields. And I think that Mud Creek and what happens through the Wall property and what they've initially looked at is, from what I've seen, it's more like open marshy areas where they're trying to push some of their storm detention and water to dry out other areas of the ground to make it developable. So there's some practical considerations here that, while it is flat, which is great from a development standpoint and easy to develop, it's also, in the last few years, 2021, 22 is extremely wet. So we're going to have to deal with that and put that water somewhere. So just be thinking about that, while we might be thinking open space and it's soccer fields or, playing fields, it may not look exactly like that.
When you're referring to the wall property, where is that?
It is.
That
Large
square
piece
down
It's
below?
it's
That square
the
here?
11-acre square just on the southwest corner of this one. They touch in there's the J Hill piece, which is the T-shaped property, and the J Hill piece touches directly to the wall property between the two, and that's where 150 East will run north-south, and we'll pick up that regional roadway. One thing to note, it's a difficult piece of ground to develop conceptually because it's so skinny and long, and the developer's done a really good job of talking to those neighboring property owners and really building a collection of land that's big enough to be a worthwhile single project. And 20 acres is a decent sized piece of ground, but it's really still skinny and, it's narrow and long. So it's not the easiest piece of property to develop and also to fit in with what is happening north-south and kind of to the southeast.
So I guess just one general, are we fully in discussion or did we want to bring up?
I was gonna, yeah, we'll invite the applicant to speak and then we can.
I started that. trend.
Continue our discussion.
I'll take the heat for that. Sorry.
So if the applicant would like to address us, again, this obviously is not site plan approval or even project concept approval. It's nice for us to know, but help us not get in the weeds on what your project you're building, because really it is the annexation and the value of the R4.
I'm always hesitant to provide a drawing like we had there. I just wanted to work with Scott on double checking the areas. If you see, there was a second drawing that I put in there that was a little more conceptual, that was color and.
Sir, can I get your name?
Oh, sorry, Travis Taylor. Sorry about that. So there's issues. Mud Creek is probably the big issue that we have to deal with. It's kind of a squiggly line diagonally through there that we'll have to address. So obviously, as we get into, and it does look flat. I mean, granted, on the east side, it's pretty flat, but as you move west, there's a lot more terrain and some junk back there and, this stuff. So there are some issues that we'll have to deal with, but conceptually that shows you, roughly that we're underneath the density allowed by the R4 zone. We do show a couple of potential detention ponds in there that we could work as we work through the process down the road. You hate to get too far into it and spend a ton of money right now because we're kind of at your mercy. So, but we have looked at it and we feel comfortable with this. We feel like the spacing is to the scale that it'll be a very livable, nice community. We have a mixture of townhomes and a couple of different types of townhomes here that are both courtyard oriented, which I think lives really well with some bigger buildings. But we also have the amenities on both sides that we've shown. Those aren't exactly nailed down, but it kind of gives you a feel of the scale and how it spreads out. So we're excited to be here. We would hope to have your recommendation for approval. And then, we've got a long way to go to work through all the details as we put this together. So
one question I have is about the open space. Would you be up for some kind of collaborative effort with the developments throughout there to kind of help solve what we want with open space, whether it's, in my opinion, it may not even be giving up ground as it is, hey, we have a parcel there that's supposed to be eventually a school, but part of that being, playground, soccer field, whatever, that's a detention pond. I'd love to, the school could wait 20 more years for all we know, but it would be nice to develop out that park region and say, hey, we got the ground, let's turn it into a park so it can help with this neighborhood. And then the developers in this area aren't necessarily giving up ground. They might be contributing to say, yeah, let's build out this park. It'll help all the residents in the area. But where there's already some ground available for that, that might be an option. But I would like to see some collaborative effort with yourself, and I don't know if you know the Walls, but
so I've met with Terry and his engineer, and that's how I got his layout and how we've aligned that road. And I met with Danny and his engineers, and that's how we worked out the alignment of 150. And I'm happy to work with those guys. You know, I guess my preference would be to pay for nothing and kick the can down the road, but I mean, right here we are. So, but
It's everybody, but
That's the
then all
most
of a
honest
sudden we
anyone's
got.
ever been in this room, myself included.
but I recognize that there's impact fees. I don't know what the city's park impact fee is per home or per unit, but there's, you know, generally a war chest there that, and these have been identified as projects. So there is an opportunity to kind of go in together. I think the storm drain ponds, you know, that area that gets set aside for that is workable. I mean, Scott brought up a good point that, hey, there's some water there, you know, so we've got to deal with that as well. And I think Danny's dealing with it on to the south of us. So we're happy to get together and do what makes sense. I mean, a park is not a bad neighbor, you know, especially for families with kids. If you've got a park right there, we provide our own amenities. Like Scott said, you know, we're kind of self-contained, but then the regional stuff, we've done this plenty of times, all the way from state fish hatcheries as part of our development to, you know, who knows? It's just, it's site specific, but we're certainly willing to look at however we can work that in.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you.
Thank you.
Now our official discussion time. I guess we'll pause for a moment, as we always do for policy. Is there any public that would like to make a comment on this item before we move to discuss and have a motion? All right, being there's no public comment. Discussion, recommendations. I mean, I think really, I mean, obviously it lies with the council. It's a legislative action for the annexation and the zone assignment. The general plan, it does meet with that, the R4. I'd like to see something, you know, to establish that. I don't know what's involved with the walls when they annexed in, if there's any participation requirement or condition with some of that stuff, or it's simply just the
There
R4 zone
wasn't,
and whatever they
yeah,
come
there
in.
wasn't for open space. I think that the idea of maybe combining some of the detention, especially between the Walls property and this property in that southwest area might work really well. And maybe the Walls would want to jump on that. So they've gotten as far as a technical review committee meeting, and their project was stalled that 150 East had to go through. So this project is going to create the north-south road connection that makes the Wall project possible. So I think really it's all collaborative, and it will happen on similar timeframes.
So you
based on
have
that.
some leverage, he's saying. Yeah.
So if I can just maybe back up just a little bit, so I can get this comment out here now before we go far into the details. I don't actually have a solution, which I think is problematic, but here's what I think. And the general plan I usually love and agree with, but as I've researched and learned a little bit more about just building strong towns and communities, I think that there could be a flaw in the general plan, and maybe this is not here nor there, but what we've done is we've put all of our multifamily, all of our higher density in one concentrated area, which tends to be somewhat problematic. Because we are discussing the zoning for this particular parcel of land, I just think it's worth considering even for half a second if there are alternatives. I don't know if there is in this particular parcel, but once again, what we have is just super high density in one area of our city, which could lead to certain just downfalls in the future. So I just want to see if anyone else is concerned about that or wondering about that.
So our job tonight is to give a recommendation on annexation, and that along with that, a recommendation on zoning.
Right.
So because it's, yeah, so
Right.
it's kind of a blank canvas, I'd say. I mean, it's governed by the general plan, but I mean, part of our job is to discuss the zone that would be applied.
Right. And your point is well taken. But as Mr. Hess said, it's the shape of that parcel is a very odd shape for for something else, probably, you know, I don't.
Well, and also at this point, it's sandwiched between two R4s.
Right,
Exactly.
which is.
And an
a
industrial zone,
challenge.
right?
But I think your point
No,
is
give me
variety
that.
though, right? So, I mean, I'm not saying it shouldn't be R4, but I think we could at
Right.
least explore, could you sandwich something else between, you know, RE20, between,
They'll always
Or
fit.
industrial.
yeah.
It's just,
No, it's not a bad idea. I think the same thing when I think about that area. Man, it's a lot of the same.
It
It's,
is.
it's a lot
Very
of the same with
concentrated.
nothing broken up. And maybe, you know, people are looking up in the zone I live in and saying the same thing about, you know, RE10 and things. Maybe it's just, wow, it's a lot of the same, but it's a lot of the same.
and that's how we built the city and that's how we've laid out the general plan. And perhaps we're too far down the river, if you will, to reverse course. It's just an interesting, you know, there have been, you know, in the planning world, there are concerns related to doing that.
Yeah, I can-
And we're gonna
yeah.
have just this pocket of higher density. So, yeah, I don't have solutions though, and I fully acknowledge that that's a problem.
I mean, I think the problem is zoning in general is just an imperfect practice, right? I mean, the literature on development like this would be multifamily with flex commercial or retail to, you know, provide an opportunity for some sort of commercial activity to occur with all of those citizens, I guess, residing there. I think, you know, I think that's where it gets difficult. I don't think you'd want to be going backward and pushing single family in here to reduce the density. I think the bigger issue is, you know, can zoning even allow, that's multifamily, but does it allow for anything that provides, you know, those amenities that make you feel like you're living less than an island? And with that many people, it's more simple. But I think the other way, in looking at the single family neighborhoods and how to get more density in there, I probably agree more with than holding the brakes on something like this to see if there's a different type of use. It seems to fit. It's just maybe not perfect, you know?
Maybe that's where the green space becomes really important, at least.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's, the green space and open space, we have open space requirement. We're going to have 1,000 kids down here in this part of town. Like, we need grass, we need field for them to play, even though, Providence Point has its own amenities. These guys would have their own amenities. I'm assuming the Wall property will have amenities as well, but you need a recreational field to be in walking distance. Otherwise, we're putting more burden on our street system because everybody's going to get in their cars and drive over to Green Acres and play on the soccer field or drive, wherever. So, and I know it's, especially with soccer and the kids' recreation sports, we need something in this area. And that's where I would come back to say, as this develops, we don't want to rely on the school to come in and build their infrastructure and then, let's build out that park. We probably ought to be proactive and get that thing built to service the community down in that area, and that to provide that soccer field, play areas. All our parks are busy, and adding more kids, especially in this area, that to support what we're doing in this, we lost some of that ability when, I guess I'll say, when we had the storage unit wall built at the intersection, that cut off a huge potential artery along Washington there to be able to be additional commercial like what's over at Prominence Point and that to service these higher densities. And so we're kind of stuck now to say, well, we're going to put some of that in, and the ability to put some of that commercial space, the restaurants, the different things along Washington, we're just going to focus those a little bit more heavy in the areas that we do have access to do some of that. So I know as far as a road, Scott talked about the road coming across. I developed those townhomes at 1,500 in Harrisville. And when we got UDOT approval for that, they had told us that there wasn't any more roads between there and 1,700 that were going to have full intersections. Yeah. So I'm not concerned that they need to have a road coming out to Washington. Because I don't think UDOT's gonna allow it.
They'll,
So-
they'll have one that's probably a right in, right out essentially, or it's not a full.
Yeah, I mean like a public right of way through the process. And so, you know, again, we're not judging what this concept drawing is and what's going in here. But for the probably recommendation on the best use of that we could do is keep it residential. The R4 zone does fit. And my recommendation to the city council would be that there is some negotiating as this goes forward and with the other developers there to get us a park going in that area, whether it's even a trade-off of a little bit of density for some funds to get the park done sooner. There's some additional ground to make the park a little bit bigger by reducing their detention requirement and walls to put it all in one spot. And maybe these guys trade a little bit with the walls to do that. So I think there's some options, but I'm just saying those so the council is hopefully hearing that when they consider this and discuss it.
I think your point, just to really quick clarify, I think that's actually really important that it is soccer field size or something to that nature. Soccer is back to back to back in our recreation with youth. It's honestly very difficult to even find fields for them to practice or play on. And currently, like all of the fields are in North Ogden. So that is actually a very good point that for these kids, they don't have ability to run soccer, baseball, etc. practices.
And Green Acres down the road is probably the worst one in town in terms of how crazy it
Just-
gets.
yeah,
you know?
packed.
It's just they got tons of grass and not tons of parking. So
And we truly are running out of space for these things. So yeah, that's.
I think the conservation's a
there,
good point, but I think the zoning, I think the shoe fits, you know, we didn't intentionally push them, you know, all into the corner of North Ogden, but I think with more people does come the opportunity of potential, you know, community creation or whatever. So I'm kind of the opinion of the more the merrier. Let's see what happens. So.
And I just wanted to point out, so there's two kind of collected open spaces on this concept plan. And if you look at the scale bar goes up to 140 feet. At 140 by 140 is just about 20,000 square feet, which is just under half an acre. So I think what you're looking at here, those two green spaces on the south, in the center, and then the southwest are probably something like a half acre combined open space, and then about a 3/4 acre or so combined open space with that linear piece of ground. There's, you know, probably room here to maybe put some of those together or like, you know, combine with what's happening at the Walls property and make something a little bit larger if those were to be dedicated. But they're not tiny is what I guess suggesting. You could go kick a ball in there and throw a Frisbee and have kids, but you're right that the general plan in this area, when it was the to be annexed area, was really easy for everybody to say that's where we should put a bunch of multifamily. And then now we're kind of reaping what we sowed at that time. And the other opportunities, if you look around our city, are places like Monroe. You're going to have an 80-foot right of way. And while today we have a lot of really quiet residential driveways on Monroe, in 20 years, that's going to be a pretty busy road. And so thinking about what you do on Monroe to maybe make it limited access and some multifamily potentially along there to buffer out some of the existing single family might be a way to fit in, kind of sprinkle this density around the city as opposed to all of it being collected in one area that was pretty low friction when this went forward to the general plan process of very limited feedback and pushback. I mean, the whole south side of the property was either unincorporated or owned by 3 or 4 or 5 collective owners total. So we had very few voices down there that were saying, I'm impacted by multifamily all being down in this quadrant of the city. And now 3 years later, we're just seeing the applications coming in that meet the general plan. So it could be time, 2024, 25, that's on the 4 to 5 year like rotation of time. We might want to open the general plan land use map back up. Eric Thomas is loving that. But to consider
3 of them under my,
there you go.
under my
Perfect.
tenure.
To consider those changes, because it really should be like moving a barge. You just make minor corrections and you do it a little bit over time. And see if we can do something that is maybe more equitably zoned than what we have right now, which is like several thousand single family units all in one area of the city. And then now we're going to have several thousand multifamily units in another little quadrant of the city. So
what, I mean, really speaking to the applicant, take your paintbrush and make your design. Like, we're not going to judge it until that step. But in the negotiation with the council, it might be one of those saying, hey, if elevations allow, move the detention ponds together and make a bigger area and maybe offer that as a public amenity, that if it's big enough for a soccer field, of my opinion, would be more of a potentially trade a little bit of land with the walls or do something and add it to the one down there, because one, for the city, it's less expensive to take care of one bigger park than it is two medium-sized parks. And it also then the traffic and the focus of that Saturday morning stuff can still stay in the same, because this being a block apart is just going to be crazy anyway. That would be my personal recommendation, to say, hey, let's get that one by the school and make it a soccer field and make it big enough that there's a lot of activity that can happen there. And because again, it's going to be less expensive for the city to take care of and really function better. And quite honestly, then you don't have residents dealing with two public parks within a block of each other. And, your residents saying, hey, this is our amenity versus, hey, yeah, it's a public park, your swimming pool's yours, public park's everybody's, or whatever. Did you have something else, Scott? Okay. Any other?
So how do you recommend that we craft that into a motion? I mean, I think you've encapsulated it, but I know you sometimes don't like to make the motion. Could you make a motion tonight? Because I don't think we disagree with you and you have the clarity of thought right now.
Yeah, I would love if the council could listen to some of the discussion.
The way you said it was
Be
perfect.
a long motion.
Well,
I
I
will,
think,
yeah,
I think you reference this meeting in the motion. I think you say, want me to take a stab at it?
I mean, I did kind of jot down what you
Yeah.
were saying, but.
Mhm.
Because there's a lot of
I don't
thoughts
think it's
there.
articulated.
And there's a lot of thoughts, and I don't know
Yeah.
if you craft it in a motion, I think we make recommendations to the gist and have them and encourage them to listen to the meeting, read the meeting minutes. That's when I don't mind necessarily when the council disagrees with us. I mean, I do, because I'm a control freak, but when it gets frustrating is when I feel like they hadn't listened. We deliberate something for an hour and I feel like or multiple meetings. And when I feel like those words aren't heard, that's when the process is frustrating to me.
Yeah, but can you put those words in the motion without saying, listen to what we talked about for 35 minutes? You know what I
True.
mean? Is there a language
Try to
there?
take a stab at it, but I
Okay,
won't be
get the mic.
as
That's
nice
gonna be
as you
good.
said it.
Go for it.
Drum roll, please.
That was a lot.
No pressure at all.
So I'll make a motion that we recommend that the city council approve this annexation and apply the multifamily R4 zone with the following condition: the property must be legally subdivided, improved, or escrowed for improvements prior to the issuance of any building permits. And also with the requirement to dedicate some open private space to become public space. We encourage some negotiating between this developer and the Wall property developer to perhaps trade off of land between some of their proposed private spaces, private green spaces, to create one large green space for a public park. Anything else?
Do we want to have it in addition to the existing? Is it in the existing one, or is that all school district property?
It's all Weaver, it's all owned by the Weaver District. Right now, there's water that enters it as Mud Creek and the detention, but it's all
Detention
owned
pond.
by
Is
Weaver.
that planned to be the park with the school district?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, and so this,
Tell them they have to strong arm school district. Just kidding.
and this would be separate from the proposed school
But if
district.
would function adjacent property that could be one big public park. I think if that, I think the school district would work with that. I mean, I know they probably would say, well, we don't want to commit where the park's gonna go because we gotta still put a building here, but
Mhm.
there's a detention pond there on the ground now anyway.
Yeah.
So it's kind of somewhat decided as it is. Otherwise, we won't allow them to build a school. Put a moratorium on schools.
So anything you guys think I should add to that motion? I know it was kind of rambling.
Does it capture like scale of said park? Because that would be, I don't know that there's a lot of benefit to a small park that can't host.
Yeah, I think I said
recreational
just to create
sports.
one large green space for a public park, but we would be looking like at the size of that to accommodate ball fields.
Well, I
and-
think it's important to be specific that, yeah, we do want it. We don't want it wetland open space. We need a park.
We need a
like
park for
Recreation park.
families and kids to play. And this would be adjacent to and separate from the proposed elementary school,
Or combined with theirs.
or
Yeah.
combined with that property.
Just whatever, yeah, can work, so. Good job,
Yeah, I'll second your motion. Well done.
and I'll repeat it verbatim. So we have a motion, just kidding. We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Is it clear to the applicant kind of what we've motioned, recommended? Again, the city council is legislative body, so what we say may not matter at all, but okay. There's no more discussion. I'll call for a vote. Commissioner Green,
Yes.
Commissioner Bailey,
Yes.
Commissioner Watson,
Yes.
Commissioner Nancarrow,
Yes.
Commissioner Mason.
Yes.
My vote, yes. So that positive recommendation will move on to the city council, and I believe they have a noticing time, right, for a public hearing?
Yep, the last process I saw was the city recorder had sent out all of the internal certifications to say, yes, we've reviewed this, and planning let them know planning commission is going to do their part. So we'll package this all up as part of the whole recommendation that gets taken forward to the council in a few weeks.
I mean, I'm sure you're aware, but usually the annexation process is a lot slower than just a rezone process, so.
Well, it was good discussion tonight. I appreciate your consideration and.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck.
Thank you, guys.
Are any other remarks from planning commissioners?
I just have one remark is kind of along these same lines is there are at least those 3 parcels left, small parcels along Washington Boulevard, right in front of this property. And, in terms of like this park, I mean, what we are is a planning commission, and it's really, I think, up to us to look at that plan, rather than just the immediate thing before us. So the discussion tonight was great, and I think we just need to keep that in mind as, those properties start coming on our radar that, maybe we need to look at that mix of commercial, or maybe we should look at it now
Mhm.
to at least rezone those properties or something. I don't know.
I would add just in keeping, a forward outlook with the general plan, with the multi-family zone there in that area, that then provides, human beings and resources that spurs the next stage of a plan, right? You get people there and then other things follow, things like a park, like we've discussed today, but, just right across the street, there's pretty low density commercial space, just right there. And again,
Where are you talking about?
just across Washington Boulevard, sorry, on the,
Well, we got a big proposal for big apartment complex there. now.
yeah, and all I'm saying is that more people drives the next phase of
Mm.
development. So, we're trying to implement a plan for that, but then there's for the, the multifamily zone right there. But then there's the next layer of that onion, and the more people that you get, the more the next stage of development, maybe the plan begins to adapt a little bit as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to drive, for density everywhere, but it does allow for a lot of shared resources and a lot of maybe experimenting with a different lifestyle than just driving around everywhere,
Mhm.
you know?
We've had well, since I've been here, I think the Kurt's Kings Plaza, whatever, has come through for development suggestions, I think 3 or 4 different times, 2 funded by the city. And, but these are the things that enable that to happen. you
Right.
know, the
It will drive
rooftops get
demand.
grown
Yeah.
in Prominence Point, these, whatever.
Mhm.
Then the commercial, those dollars are able to be spent on food services or commercial outlets, or whatever. And those are better to be somewhat dense together as well. And so it's going to help that whole area as we have with the general plan. Unfortunately, it's really along Washington right there. It's just kind of going to be what it is because there's going to be limited access. So
Wall,
at
you
least
said?
on Washington,
I'm
on RC. A wall, I did say.
We're gonna have Wall Avenue and then Wall Boulevard,
Yeah, we're gonna
right?
Have Wall Avenue and the wall. So I think it works. But we just have to make sure, when we look at it, if we continue looking at things as one parcel at a time as they come before us,
Exactly.
you get painted into the corner and it's like, wait, all of a sudden we got 3,000 kids in this area and we don't have a park.
Exactly.
And so that's what probably should have went a little bit more into when we did the wall property and some of that is saying, hey, this is planned and probably got the school district involved at that time to say, but that's what's important and what we want. Cause being a developer, I know it's like, hey, we need open space. Well, that's easy. I got all these wetlands I got to deal with. We're just going to leave it as that. That's open space for Sky, but that does nothing for the public as far as getting gathering spaces or places for the kids to play. And so we got to look at both aspects of it. As sometimes the open space is a requirement can sometimes be a little bit vague and although it's open, it may not meet the need that we have or we're going to have.
Well, and I think just last thought is just that comment you made earlier about traffic patterns matters too. With all of this density in that area, it is important that there's a park, that there's a school, that there's a grocery store ideally, or some shopping. It really should become, and to your point, like a self-contained environment, right? So that we don't have everybody having to head up the mountain to get basic resources, because that is going to be an issue as we grow this community. So I think that's all well said.
Unpopular opinion alert. I know I'm going to get laughed out of here, but I don't care. When we were thinking about this, I thought, where should this park go? And I realize Washington Boulevard wants the commercial, and I realize all that, and nobody wants a soccer ball kicked out on Washington Boulevard. But I seriously thought, like, from an aesthetic standpoint, wouldn't a park be cool, right, where people see it, right? So it's not stuck in a neighborhood or whatever, but it's like, hey, this is our community. And we like parks and we like green and we like open space and stuff. And I was seriously thinking, like, Washington Boulevard would be a heck of a place for a park. The right park. It has to be massive though. It can't just be a little pocket park, right?
Right.
So
Big park, with big trees and big.
yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, you see that in other
yeah,
communities.
Kaysville
you know?
has a
Yeah.
very large soccer complex on a very busy road,
Right.
not as busy as
Right.
Washington.
I'm not saying this would work for this, but that's why I say quiet.
That's what Barker Park will be when we get the gondola in. All that traffic and this great big park right next to the busy road.
I mean, I like the thinking that you have because, it does concern me that this is really the entrance of our city and, it's just, I feel like it's just going to be big
Right.
apartment buildings on both
Like
sides.
a sense of place is so important to a community, and you lose it when it's Chick-fil-A's and townhomes along your main drag, really. So,
Ooh, throws a dart at Chick-fil-A.
yeah, I'm throwing shade at Chick-fil-A. I told you, unpopular
Getting
opinion.
real.
I told you.
Really made it unpopular there.
Yeah, it's soccer
I
moms
do,
everywhere.
I agree with you, although I believe that we could, in development of those properties, figure out a way to have open space and commercial work together to where it might be a little smaller open space. It's maybe not a soccer field on along Washington Boulevard, but it still has big trees and has under the North Ogden feel. It's somewhere to congregate if you have that retail space there, right? So, you know, as we think about that moving forward, because I don't think the likelihood of us telling somebody, well, we're going to make this prime Washington property that you've been sitting on for 100 years, a soccer field and only a soccer field.
Well, it's not as prime anymore. There's not gonna be a frontage road.
Sorry, Trader Joe's. This is a soccer field. Just kidding.
That's true.
Scott, what do you got for us?
I mean, I can say this because I live in Kaysville, but my unpopular opinion is that we just generally have too many small cities. So if we can just,
I
you
agree.
know, collect Harrisville and Pleasant View and North Ogden together into one city and average out all of our needs and our services and our tax revenues and all those things, that's what I would do if I were commissioner for a day. And then I would immediately be kicked out of office, but that's what that's what I would
Yeah,
hope
that
to
would
do
never
is
fly.
consolidate our
Can't
small
even-
cities.
Barely can get them to agree to share a fire department.
This is
Can't get
true.
them to agree to share a police force, so.
It's true. Yeah.
We call it
It's
North
so true.
Pleasantville.
North Pleasantville.
Well, the
I
name
like
Okay, unpopular opinion alert. The name North Ogden's a terrible name of a city. It's directions. Like, it's terrible. Right? Like, when you tell people, oh, I'm from North Ogden.
Can we?
It's great to clarify though that I'm not
Hey,
from.
You know, it's
Ogden.
distinct
Yeah.
This is
from
our
South
economic
Ogden.
developers' time to give comments.
can we-
Ours is over.
Okay, fine.
Can we adjourn the meeting?
It's a
and
terrible
then have
name.
this
It should be called
conversation?
Barkerville.
So just some upcoming things. We do have a few administrative items that have come in. We've got some subdivisions and each one of them is problematic in its own way. So I don't know at what point it's going to get to planning commission. We've held a technical review committee on a subdivision on the east side that includes a section of Mountain Road, but it's just development is fairly slow right now. So we're working through some old legislative items that are making it up to council. And it might really be time to go back into and open up the code. We've been collecting a whole list of references now that we've been using the new Title 11 city code for the land use code. And it might be time that we bring forward those public hearings and do some zoning ordinance work and different things because we don't have a whole lot of applications coming in for specific items. One thing I did want to note that's I think a pretty good win is that the trail along Coldwater Creek for Village at Prominence Point that was so problematic and difficult to get from 1900 down to the lodge is complete and done and in. And they, like a surgeon with a scalpel, like just fit this thing in a really tight right of way, worked with the property owners to improve some retaining walls, get some fencing done. They've got all the grass done. They grassed over it. They fixed and improved a detention basin that had weeds that were 8 feet tall, but nobody really could see them because they were on the west side of Village at Prominence Point next to Coldwater, hidden behind the lodge essentially. So I would suggest you go down there and walk that new trail section and take a look. I think that they did a really good job fitting that in. And that was the necessary item in order to get the certificate of occupancy for those 2 apartment buildings that have been built at Village of Prominence Point. So they were extremely motivated to get that done. But you'll start to see those lease up. I think pretty soon they're very close to certificate of occupancy. And then there's 2 additional buildings that have been approved through the building permit process. So we'll see 2 more go vertical really soon. So by maybe this time next year, another 14 months, we'll have another 2 buildings complete and done out there and they're marching forward. So the new group that's taken over Village at Prominence Point seems to at least, seems to be able to meter that project out and be building it. But the trail we just walked, we did an approval of it last week and it was impressive that they got it done. It was a difficult project. So.
Can I get the dates for the planning conference in Provo again? My schedule changed a little and
Yep. Is it the 10th and 11th? 10th, 11th and 12th of October.
Next week.
that's a
It's just the
Friday,
2
Saturday,
days.
Sunday. That's in October, right?
Sorry, it's
A Thursday, Friday, Saturday?
Thursday, Friday. So it's October 10, 11, October 10th and 11th.
Thanks.
Yeah, let me know if you'd like to go. The cost for the planning commission members doesn't, I don't think changed. So please
Oh, it's
email me
not.
as soon as you can if you want to attend and we'll get you registered.
Thank you.
That's all I have.
Thank you. John,
Nothing,
the meeting since you've been with us, but
I-
maybe it's just me that's been gone.
well, I think we've all been gone. I was gone last meeting. Everyone else was gone the meeting before. But it's been a great summer. If you've got a furry friend, the K9, they're doing the K9 Kerplunk on Saturday at the pool. It's not people swimming, just dogs. So, but it is fenced and, you know, there's fun to be had. And then, you know, there's other stuff coming up. The Fright Night is in the end of October. If you've got kids or grandkids that like dressing up, that's always fun. But nothing too exciting on our side, other than watch your email for the save the date for the holiday party. If you haven't already seen that, just we'll keep you updated so that, you know, you're all invited to come and have some fried mushrooms with us.
Thank you.
And there is a raised hand. I don't know when it got raised, but
Oh, we'll invite our city councilman, Councilman Pulver to, I guess he's a Publix. This is Chris Pulver, resident of North Ogden. Go ahead.
No, just, it was a quick one, basically that, we didn't really talk about owner occupation for the townhouses, but I think that's something that's, gonna be driven, and I know they're trying to not to do a development agreement, but I think with some of the interactions that we're talking about with parks and stuff like that, that we might have to do at least something. And that owner occupancy would, might come into play as well, because that's been kind of been driven a lot by, the state as well. So I don't know what's gonna transpire there, but that, just something to think about.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Mr. Pulver, thanks for your attention to our meeting too, as I bagged on the rest of the city council.
I actually listen. I mean, I think there's several that listen later, but to be honest, if there's something that I need to say, you know, why not ask for,
Yeah.
hey, you know, do now instead of waiting till later. So.
I appreciate you listening to our deliberation and you know where our head's at and I really do appreciate it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that motion.
We have a motion and a second to